Welcome to a somewhat special episode of Converge this week. I'm excited to have Steve Dooley, who is a prior guest on Converge. He's the head of market insights at Convera. Steve, good to have you. We're going to be doing a little preview of our upcoming Fintech2025 Trends, Technology, and Transformation in Global Commerce report that is being released next month. And today we just want to give you a taste of the report to hopefully pique your interest enough to click on the link in the show notes and grab your copy when it is released next month. So without further ado, Steve, thanks for being here. How are you today?
Thanks for having me on, Alex. Yeah, great to be here. Excited to be able to present a preview of this report. There's been a lot of the team working on this. There's some great insights and really looking forward to being able to release it next month.
Right there with you. So let's dive in just to some of the topics that we cover in this report. Number one, of course, the cross-border payments industry globally. Steve, can you tell the listeners a little bit about the current trends that are shaping the cross-border payments market that will be notably covered in the report?
Yeah, look, the cross-border payment space has been a space that's just seen massive growth really over the last 50 years. You think about the development of interconnected global trade, globalization. It's been one of the markets and industries that's seen some of the most rapid growth over the last 50 years, and it doesn't look like that's going to change at any time soon. The market's expected to grow up to $290 trillion by 2030. And a lot of the trends that have driven us to this point continue over the next 5 years. International e-commerce, of course, massive since the introduction of the internet in the 1990s. Increased globalization and mobility of workforces, and the really significant changes we've seen in payment processing, particularly over the last 5 or 10 years. A lot of the payment systems in the international payment space have lagged what we've seen in the consumer space. And as this space plays catch up, we do expect to see that continued growth really accelerating. What's also interesting is that where a lot of the growth is seen is particularly in the Asia Pacific. First of all, it's an area that is already seeing large and rapid economic growth in the first case, but the demographics of Asia tend to be younger. Younger people tend to take up new technologies quicker, and so we're seeing the adoption of digital payment platforms really driving that growth in Asia Pacific as well. Also, the mobility not just of workforces but of students throughout Asia as well.
Yeah, we'll break a couple of those demographics down in these next questions, but it's often stated that the B2C innovation within B2C or adoption of new technologies will inevitably influence the B2B markets as well. So when we're talking about the key components of the cross-border payments markets, we have, of course, wholesale and retail markets. What are the key components among those? And talk a little bit about the distinctions between the two.
Yeah, so the wholesale market is by far the largest market, and that's intergovernment transactions, high value transactions like hedge funds or investment flows, currency trading, very much financial activities managed by commercial banks. And you think of some of the sizes, the bets being taken on by hedge funds or investment firms, they're absolutely massive. They tend to be driven by leverage. So they are by far the largest part of the overall transaction pool. So it's also high frequency, tends to be very low margin. On the other hand, there's the retail market, and that sort of tends to be lower value, more frequent transactions such as remittances, consumer payments, but also B2B is probably one of the larger parts of that space as well. The wholesale market, around 146 trillion in flows. That's the wholesale market. Like I said, the retail market tends to be much smaller, but it's still very frequent. And particularly got a lot of opportunity because of the lower value, the frequency. There's really that potential to be able to provide a lot more service to improve the quality of experience that businesses, consumers, other entities do experience in that retail cross-border payment market.
Yeah, yeah. So, in terms of the types of transactions, how do different transaction types within that retail market contribute to the growth of the space?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, it's really B2B, trade and intercompany payments that tend to dominate that retail space. So, in particular, you think about trade, imports and exports. It's a really we've seen how much international trade has grown over the last 30, 50 years, and that's the dominant part of the retail market. Those trade-related payments, but also those multinational corporate transfers. And we do a lot of work in areas like Singapore, for example, which acts as a hub for a region. So a lot of multinationals will direct their money first into Singapore and then disperse it through the region in that way. So that tends to be the two big parts of the B2B space, but also services as well. So when we talk about trade and we think traditionally of goods, importing, computer monitors or Nintendos or solar panels, but it's also services, legal firms, a whole lot of accountancy and financial services accounts for that as well. Then it's consumer to business when consumers are paying businesses. That tends to be the part that's most closely linked to the e-commerce. Making a payment on internet through a seller on the internet. That's really the other big part. And then suddenly we go into a lot smaller part of the pie, consumer to consumer payments, which is particularly those remittances, and then business to consumer payments. Payrolls and other smaller payments from a business into the consumer.
Got it. So one of the segments that you speak on, or we've written about in this report, is education-related payments. Of course, tuition-related payments. Tell us a little about what we've learned about the evolution of that space and its, the impact of some of these trends on education payments that we cover in the report. Can you give a little bit of color there?
It's a part of the global economy that is probably overlooked, I think, by a lot of observers that don't have direct experience. But if you look at Australia, for example, where I am based, our top 10 exports, it's iron ore, it's liquefied natural gas. But in the top 10 as well is also education. And that becomes a bit of a shock for what you would expect Australia as an exporter of iron ore and LNG. Yes, education, maybe not. So it's a really considerable component in terms of global flows and global payment flows. And we've seen a huge explosion in international education, international student mobility. From 1998 to 2020, it actually tripled over that time, and right around the world, the ability for greater mobility for between countries in general, but also the rise of that focus where universities saw that it's a good and profitable opportunity. has really driven that increase. There's no real signs of that expected to slow down, and as a result, there's a scene that there's that expectation that this will be a market that will continue to grow and continue to drive growth in the cross-border payments. We often think, well, for a cross-border, for a student, you think about those payments. Well, it's tuition fees, but it's not just tuition fees, it's living expenses as well, and that contributes substantially to the growth in cross-border payments as well. So again, and some of those the living expenses, where do they sit when you categorise? And it kind of explores, shows you how difficult it is to get a handle on exactly where everything sits. Is that part of the education? Is that part of your general, what we mentioned earlier, consumer-to-consumer remittances? So it shows that it's difficult to handle exactly on where you categorize all of these payments, but it's a massive market regardless.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, let's shift over to the fun stuff here. Obviously, the cross-border payments industry as a whole stands to really receive or stands at the cusp of a lot of new technologies that hopefully will improve things, because it's a cumbersome, well-known process that and draws out a lot of cumbersome, old sort of antiquated ways of doing things. The movement of value and money across borders. There's new technologies now that are popping into the scene that have been around for a while. Real-time payment schemes are not new per se, but they're certainly becoming increasingly popular. And of course, the impact that technology can have on the opacity and the slow process and the high fees of cross-border payments is significant. And so we talk a lot about those in this report. Would love to get your take and just have you share a little bit about how real-time payments, before we go into the specific technologies that underpin them, is influencing global financial transactions at a high level.
Yeah, I mean, just to take a step back, I think this is what's interesting about the report that we've been working on, is that what we've talked about, previously has been, for the last 10 minutes or so, has been the current state of the market, and looking forward, where that innovation, where the opportunities are, I think is, really interesting. Like you say, the advancement of real-time payments is really key, and it goes back to that theme of consumers are used to a certain experience in making payments domestically, and it's very different internationally. And it's not just the legacy networks or the multitude of steps. There's compliance. There's a higher regulatory hurdle to overcome to make an international payment. So there's a whole range of different factors that drive that difference in experience that you get between consumer and cross-border payments. But like you say, real-time payments is the holy grail for the cross-border payment world, and we're still some time from there, but this is where the industry is looking to move to. So I think that's one of the interesting parts of the report, is looking how we get to that space where, can we really revolutionise the financial landscape by providing immediate or close to immediate transaction capabilities, and sort of reduce that dependence on for example, when a bank in when a bank in Chile or Argentina is open. So that's the holy grail that we're getting to. What's interesting is that it's about international cooperation and setting standards that needs to be achieved. So it's not just from a business level or from an industry level. It's from a national level as well. And where we're seeing some of the advancements already is in the European Union, that has that ability now to be able to work across borders. The experience they've had between working cross borders has really shown that there's been a measurable impact on the economic efficiency after the European Union's implemented real-time payment system. So again, there's a great benefit for the industry. There's a great benefit for the consumer, and when I say consumer, I mean business and consumers. But also, there's a great opportunity for economic advancement and an improvement in economic activity by being able to overcome this hurdle.
Yeah. So obviously, there's a lot of talk about getting to that truly real-time state, which you said is the holy grail. And one such technology, of course, that has some promise, but of course, additional challenges and hurdles is blockchain and crypto-enabled, crypto asset or digital asset-enabled payments, because these payments can operate around the clock, 24/7. There's a certain amount of transparency, finality, and speed associated with them that holds a lot of promise for cross-border, and that's why there's a lot of discussion around this. So, from your view and some of what we cover in the report, detail for us a little bit how blockchain is transforming financial transactions, and this can encompass CBDCs, stable coins, or whatever area of that innovation that you think might have an impact in the near future.
Yeah, so this is an application. I mean, this is an application. This is a solution that's been, in part of the ecosystem now for 10 years or more, and really getting it to fit, getting that acceptance is really what's quite critical. And of course, on one side you've got the technology where we're working on applications, and then the other side we've got the hype of Bitcoin, the reputational impact that we have from a very highly speculative market. So there's kind of two competing streams of thought going on in blockchain. But in terms of the technology, I think that most observers would say that it's got the potential to really enhance transparency and security of financial transactions. But again, it comes down to the acceptance and uptake. And I think that's what the real battle is. I think that the application and the impact is clear, but the uptake is what's critical. So it's got a reputational issue to overcome. That's been partly a result that we've got so much hype on the other side of it with the speculation and the impact, the reputational impact of digital currency exchanges. So again, where financial institutions see the opportunity by adopting blockchain, making it faster and more secure transactions, it also comes down to getting the buy-in. And I think that's what you mentioned earlier is really interesting, is that like we're seeing with the European Union, that central bank digital currencies, getting buy-in from central banks is probably going to be necessary to really see that uptake. And we're seeing that with these central bank digital currencies. But it's funny because blockchain, one of the key unique selling points of blockchain was that it was going to be that not need government intervention, not need central banks. It was going to be able to operate on its own. But because of the reputational impact, we kind of do need governments and central banks to pick it up. It's probably cuts against its original idea, but with that reputational story, that's what we're looking for. Yeah.
No, it's been the most interesting evolution from sort of an obscure niche technology that popped its head out post financial crash in 2009, and now is the talk of the town in a lot of financial spheres. And of course, investors with the ETFs being approved, now buying it as a store of value. So obviously, that's just part of the picture. We're really focused on the rails of digital currencies, the rails that they operate on, those 24/7 payment rails can really improve the cross-border payments industry, I think, in the long run, if not the short term as well. So we cover a lot of this, and we're excited to have you along with this journey alongside us. Let's talk about the regulatory side, however, because that is what you noted, Steve, is sort of the impending sort of change that needs to happen for more widespread acceptance of not just CBDCs and blockchain, but more open banking standards, more ability for payment processors to connect to fintechs to then offer their customers the type of innovation that they're looking for with that speed, transparency, and cost savings. So where are we with regulatory developments, and what are you looking forward to in the coming years?
I love the fact that we talk about payment rails because it just harkens back to the 19th century of building train lines, across America or across the globe, and certainly, in Australia in particular, we had 6 different states and they all had different gauge, different size railways, and we'd have to be impossible to be able to, have a train from one part of Australia to another without making substantial changes. And this is the exact same environment we've got in the 21st century, where we've got different rails in different countries, and to be able to really make payments operate quickly, then we need to have all the same gauge rail lines in a different context, but it's the same story. So regulatory developments are absolutely critical, and getting buy-in globally to be able to really take that next step is critical. And like you say, in Europe with PSD3, globally with GDPR, that's significantly changing the fintech landscape. So, PSD3, which sounds like a droid from Star Wars, but isn't. That aims to increase the security and transparency of that payment landscape across the EU. And again, what we're seeing, we mentioned earlier with the European Union, but the ability of the EU to build consensus quicker across a whole lot of different countries means that we do find sometimes that ends up being the default standard, not just in financial services, but in a lot of the regulatory landscape. So, what we're seeing in Europe again, sets the standard that the standard for those global rails, and potentially becomes a springboard for the globe. That's really the point of GDPR, to set that global benchmark for data privacy, and again, part of that overall build into open banking is those well established and agreed upon standards. So the next 3 or 4 years, critical that the regulatory development will be a driver, but really critical that the industry gets on the front foot and makes submissions and is a leader here, so that the industry gets a result that's best for consumers and best for the industry. So it's critical time over the next 5 years or so for the industry to get it right, to be able to deliver to consumers and businesses in the way we want to.
Couldn't have said it better. It really is critical time. That's why we named the report Trends, Technology, and Transformation, because that's really what's happening here. It's a genuine transformation of an industry that is probably the hardest to transform of all out there. So, Steve, I think we gave people plenty to chew on here. Thanks so much for the preview of what's to come in the report. Again, please click in the show notes to get your copy. And we'll be releasing this live at Money 2020 in Amsterdam next month, and we hope to see you there. If you're there, please come by and say hello. Steve, it was great to have you. We're looking forward to this.
Thank you so much for having me on, Alex. Really excited. It felt like it was a great conversation. Really looking forward to talking about it more as we release the report and get to Money 2020 in Amsterdam. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.